But in terms of the anti-police terror project, James Burch is APTP's policy coordinator. He began fighting for freedom in 2007 at the Southern Center for Human Rights, where he investigated human rights conditions in Georgia and Atlanta, I think that means. Alabama. Right. Georgia and Alabama, prisons, jails, and the court system for 2 years. He left in 2009 to study civil rights law at Georgetown University's Law Center. Upon graduating in 2012, James clerked briefly at the ACLU, Southern California, before moving to the Bay Area, where he joined Frisco 500 and other local orgs before joining APTP's Black Leadership Committee and assuming the role of policy coordinator. James focuses on curtailing state violence and all of its many forms on the pathway to liberation.
Thank you. As was said, I'm APTP's policy director, and I thought it'd be helpful to, one, explain what our policy committee does, and two, give just a little more round out of what APTP's been up to lately. So there's four main things I'm going to talk about: our work for families, the guides and trainings we've been developing, our state and local political advocacy, and then our 21st century survival programs. So first, as been mentioned by both Asantwa and Annie, the core of our work is work for families and support for families. I know movement philosophy states strongly that support is for the most directly impacted, and in our work fighting against state violence, those are folks who have been victims of state violence. And so we take direction from those folks, we support those folks, and we try to put them in positions where they are making the decisions on how to navigate the path to justice. We try to give folks all of the tools that we can and allow them to make the decisions, because one thing that we've learned is that this is an incredibly disempowering process for families who are victims of police violence at every step of the way, and it's very deliberate. And so anything we can do to put power back in the hands of the families is a goal in and of itself, outside of like the pathway to justice. Just the empowering of the families is a goal in and of itself, and really has to be first and foremost to the work that we're doing. I wanted to lift up, I think, what is an interesting. Let me just like tell the story. So Charlene Tyndall in January was shot 3 times in the back by a BART police officer and killed in West Oakland. Under the videos online, if you can bear to watch it, it's terrible. It's a terrible video. And despite the video very clearly showing this man get shot on his knees 3 times in the back, the response from the community hasn't been what we have expected, right? People aren't out in the streets, people aren't banging down doors, people aren't demanding justice for Charlene Tyndall, right? Like, meanwhile, in Sacramento, Stephon Clark was recently murdered under very similar conditions, shot, unarmed, it's very clear it was a bad shoot. And fortunately for the Clark family, like, people have come out and people have responded. And the difference between those two cases, there's like virtually no difference between those two cases or the response of the folks, right? The difference is just sometimes the political conditions are there for a movement to start and sometimes they're not. And so what's one of the most difficult things we face with families is we could do the same thing after 10 police murders, and one time it might have national attention, and people might be in the streets by the thousands, and then 9 other times people might not even hear what's going on. So our job, I find, as organizers is to organize regardless of how many people show up, if it's 5, if it's 10, if it's 500, if it's 5,000, right? Not only do we need to be out there, we need to honor everyone who has made the commitment and spent their time and energy to be out there as well, right? Because what may start with 5 might turn into 500 or 5,000. And we need everyone to believe.
Rodney King.
Can you say more?
That was obscene. Rodney King in Los Angeles. Was that his last name?
That was his last name.
It wasn't his last name.
No, that was. Rodney King was killed, was beaten.
Yeah, I just thought you might speak about him.
Oh,
that was obscene.
I didn't organize on the scene. That was a little before my time.
Okay.
I was probably lost on my journey at that point. So I'll try to speak more. So again, another thing I want to make clear is that these are protracted struggles, right? As Asantwa said, the first 3 or 4 weeks after somebody's murdered by the police, you might get a couple thousand people in the streets. Right? 6 months later, you might have an event where 15, 20, 30, 40 people show up. And that's not to disparage the people who are trying to do this work. Folks have jobs. Our media is set up in a way to deliberately flood folks with information, so there's always just sensory overload. There's always an injustice that folks need to fight. So, there might be 4 people who have been killed since the one person who had been campaigning for, and folks might have moved on. And so there are a lot of political realities that our opponents take advantage of when it comes to campaigning for folks who have been killed by police, right? So at our minimum capacity, again, we're there for the family. I think one of the last things I wanted to mention on that was what's happening in San Francisco right now, which I consider a cautionary tale, right? In Oakland, when someone is killed by the police, APTP is out in the streets. Immediately and with heavy presence. So much so that if you're a police department that operates in the East Bay, you understand that if you kill someone, there are serious consequences. Right? There's going to be media, and there's going to be attention, and it's going to cost time, energy, and resources to fight back against it. I'm not saying we're victorious. Most of these cops get away with what they're doing, right? But it comes at a great cost to the police department to combat what's happening, right? And obviously, and also a civil suit as well. Right? In San Francisco, unfortunately, at this point, there is not a similar organizing presence. And that's no disrespect to the folks in San Francisco. The gentrification machine in San Francisco is like nothing I've ever seen. It is one of the more oppressive vehicles that I've ever experienced. And so those folks are just trying to keep their folks in the city or even in the Bay Area in general. And so no disrespect to San Francisco. And I know that because there is no presence that rallies when the police kill people, police kill folks with impunity. Like I know 2 from this year, 1 from December of last year, like several more during that year. I'd say every 4 months or so, the San Francisco Police Department shoots and kills someone. And most of those cases over the last several years have been unarmed. And so the problem for San Francisco is those cops and those police departments have not been conditioned to learn that if they kill someone that there's consequences, that there will be people in the streets. Because in fact there's like a marked absence of people in the streets, unfortunately. And so without that presence, the cops continue to kill. So when we talk about supporting the most impacted folks, I think that's one of the many, many reasons why APTP says family first. Right? If there's no one riding for the families, then all of the other conditions on the ground when it comes to combating state violence become much more difficult to face, right? Because again, the police get conditioned to understand, okay, so we basically run this town, and we can do whatever we want. And that bleeds across to all areas, right? Then they start flexing on the city council, and then they start, feeling themselves. It becomes an epidemic across all systems. Okay, so that's family support. I'm going to move on to guides and trainings. While it is great to be here in such a tremendous privilege, we can only be in one place at one time, right? And so one of the things that we've been learning is that our materials, if we can put into a guide that looks like this means that we can just, spread our work much more quickly and much more efficiently than we would have ever hoped, right? And so the goal when creating these guides is that if someone falls victim to police violence, their family member can pick it up, open it up, and run a campaign on assisted. Right? That's the goal, right? Because we can't be in Bakersfield, we can't be in San Diego, we can't be outside Los Angeles, we can't even be in San Francisco when we're in Oakland, right? We don't have the capacity. We're all organizing like at capacity or over capacity. So creating guides and making replicable models for folks is something that I've seen spread across the United States right now that seems like a really fruitful way to share the work that we're doing. Like I know all of y'all who work in this field know how siloed we all are. Oh, I'd love to meet with your group, but I'm so busy with my own shit, I couldn't possibly meet with you until like 3 months from now. It's like what we hear all the time because we're all really genuinely busy with the work that we're doing, right? But that means that we're depriving ourselves of the knowledge that everyone else in the rooms that we're in have. And so finding ways to make it really easy for people to just pick it up, read it, and get that information without having to schedule a number of calls or the arduous process, or just set up one training where we go, do a training, leave these guidebooks, and leave folks with the ability to then train other folks and propagate our model, right? And change it and make it better, right? And develop, come back with I'd love if someone came back and said, hey, we edited your model, right? We've been working with it for 2 years, we found a bunch of things that don't work, here you go. That would be lovely. And so that's what the hope with some of the work we're doing with these guides. So very quickly, the other guides that we're working on right now is in the United States, the constellation of laws that protect police are very confusing for folks to understand. It's not only, it's like state law, it's local law, and then the police union contracts all come together to create an almost undefeatable system. And so we're trying to make a guide to explain that. I don't know if you have police commissions in Canada. In the United States, they're like a fake board. I don't want to be disrespectful. It's a group of people. Basically, you know, as citizens, we were like, we need an independent body that monitors the police. And the government was like, we'll give you something that looks kind of like that. And it looks nothing like that. It's a bunch of city elected officials who sit on a board and rubber stamp everything the police do with no power. Right? So we're trying to make a guide to best practices regarding police commissions, because we find other cities are going through the same exact struggle we just went through several years ago. Like there was a ballot measure, Measure LL, that passed in Oakland that enabled this police commission that essentially does, you know, nothing. Right? And so we see other cities going through the same process, making a police commission that does nothing. And so we're trying to give them tools to prevent all the traps, tricks, and pitfalls that hit Oakland along the way to try to make a police commission that was actually functional. And then finally, defunding the police, which is something I'm going to talk about in just a second. In the United States, police departments in major metropolitan areas get anywhere between 30 and 50% of the general funds of those cities. And so when I talk general funds, I'm saying, like, cities have a bunch of money that's tied up, that cannot be used. Maybe it's for pensions, maybe it's because they have bonds that they've taken out, like this money that can't be touched. But then there's a pile of discretionary dollars. They usually call it general fund in the United States. Of that general fund, the police get 30, 40, 50% of that money, right? So, you know, so 40 cents out of every dollar is going to the police, and 1 cent is going to child service, and 1 cent is going to the arts, and 4 cents is going to the Department of Public Works, and 6 cents is going to, you know, all these other programs that are near and dear to us. And so every time there's a budget cycle that comes up, and these folks say, hey, you know, we need money for this program, and the city says the money is not there, they're being extremely disingenuous. The money is in the police budget. All of the money is in the police budget across the United States when it comes to major cities. It's kind of one of those things where, you know, politicians just thought they'd just leave it be and let it be its own thing, and it's got to the point where the police unions and the police departments are so powerful that they're the strongest voting bloc in the city. You know, they're the strongest entity in the entire city when it comes to what they can command. Right? If you're commanding 40% of a city's budget, how strong are you? You know? And so one thing that we're trying to do is spell that out for folks so they can combat those systems, right? The police are very tricky when it comes to protecting their money. I feel like I'm talking for a very long time. I'm doing that. Okay, all right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really quickly, I don't think I'm going to go into the details. We do some work in the state, so that's like the local work we do. Defund OPD is the main work that we do, right? Again, I think it's the way to get the most folks on our team when it comes to achieving our objectives. We should defund the police because fuck the police, right? But like, this room nods heads, and then I go into other rooms and everyone's like, oh, that's terrible. Like, I can't believe you said that, right? Like, I hate the police, right? And all that blah, 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 right? Right? And so, I'm straight. And so, but when I say something like, man, we're really mismanaging our funds, right? 40 cents out of every dollar is going to the police. Like, all of these fiscal conservatives are like, oh dear, like, that's terrible, right? And they all identify and they all get on the team. And it's funny, but it's like, it's this phenomenon that's actually like very, very true right now. And it's an avenue of exploitation where we can say, yeah, like, we've got you. And we can see, at least in Oakland, they know it. They're very intimidated. I'm expecting them to try to short circuit what we're doing sometime soon and maybe like cut the police budget a little themselves to prevent the big cuts that we're looking for or something. Because we can see the fear in their eyes. They know that their city is facing a bankruptcy problem in the next decade, right? They know that they need to make meaningful budget reforms, and this is the logical area to start. But they can't do it because the police are so strong. So we catch them in that contradiction, and what we're trying to do is allow everyone else to have the tools to catch their police departments in that contradiction as well. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about is our state work. We do work at the state legislative level. That's a new experiment for APTP. That's something that we've started this year. And as you can imagine, working at the state level with state legislatures, there was a lot to find distasteful in that process. There was a lot of backroom dealing, there's a lot of negotiating, there's a lot of horse trading that as APTP, as a principled organization, like we find very discomforting, right? So one of the things we're trying to work on right now is how to maintain our principles in a legislative arena that allows almost for only unprincipled behavior. And so I don't have any answers on that one yet, but I do know that the presence of so-called radical groups is necessary, at least in our legislature, right? Like, we're in an all roads in approach when it comes to the US right now. Like, all types of work are necessary. We need folks, banks shutting it down, but we also need folks having the hard conversations in the legislature. For instance, we have a law that a bill in the state legislature in California right now that might change the laws around use of force and make it more difficult for police to kill folks. Not much more difficult, but more difficult, and it would be the most radical use of force standard in the country. And again, it's that weird balance of that doesn't mean much, right? Is it going to practically change the conditions on the ground? No, but it's a step in the right direction, and it clears room for people with more radical aims to do the type of work that they're trying to do. So I don't know where APTP fits in that puzzle right now. I think that's a conversation that we're still having, but we do know that there's a vacuum at our state legislature where there needs to be a radical voice to make sure that these bills don't get watered down and turned to shit like they always do at the state legislature. Right? I feel like there's a better way to do things, and there need to be radical folks on the table. So like, if anyone else is interested in that area, like, I have a bunch of questions, because again, this is our first time, but that's definitely where our work is leading in some regard.